People hold a wide range of views about how to address crime, but there's at least one area where there ought to be widespread agreement. The steps we take to address crime ought to do what advocates say they'll do. And that's where our next guest comes in. Brandon Garrett is a professor at the Duke Law School. He recently spoke to the John Locke Foundation about research projects seeking to make criminal justice more evidence-based. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So when we talk about making criminal justice more evidence-based, what are we talking about?
It means a number of different things. So quite a bit of my research looks at wrongful convictions. Obviously, it's not good evidence if it's literally false evidence that's convicting someone. And in a lot of my early work, I've studied what causes eyewitnesses to get it wrong. Obviously, they're not intending to. What causes people to falsely confess. How to improve forensic science so it can be more accurate. And so all those accuracy-related issues have to do with getting the evidence right so that we catch guilty people and clear innocent people. But there's a lot more work happening across the country looking at not just, okay, no one wants innocent people in jail, but how do we rely on better evidence to inform policy? How do we think about when is imprisonment appropriate and for how long and when it isn't it? And what can we do to have better outcomes when people come out of jail or prison, since almost everyone inevitably does? What are better ways to combat crime?
I would suspect that a lot of people haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about the role that evidence plays in here. You basically think there's a crime, there's a penalty. Because we've had crimes for many years, we all seem to know what the right penalty is, but it hasn't necessarily been based on evidence.
Well, yeah, and so actually, a lot of the modern approaches towards sentencing and criminal enforcement aren't that old. Things really changed in the 1970s because there was a huge crime wave, both homicides, other types of crimes, and people weren't overreacting. People were reacting to some really difficult problems. And all of a sudden in the mid-90s, crime started going down, and that's created more breathing room. We don't know why crime went up, by the way, or why it went down. Criminologists don't really have a good fix on that, which is also really disturbing for those of us who think, okay, as lawyers, we want to get criminal laws right, and that's a good way to deter crime or prevent crime. We don't know why crime goes up and down. But what a lot of people are thinking about today is, well, how long do sentences need to be? And are there better ways to prevent crime and integrate people to society when they inevitably do get out of jail and prison? And we need research on that. We need research on how to handle the connection between mental health and the criminal justice system. And I think lots of people are thinking about that today. Lots of people are also thinking about how do we handle addiction, especially with the opioid epidemic in North Carolina and around the country. You can't, use jail or prison as a blunt instrument to prevent the spread of addiction. There's certainly a role for criminal law and criminal punishment, but we're realizing that there also needs to be a medical role, and how to get that medical legal connection right is another challenge.
We are chatting with Brandon Garrett, professor at the Duke Law School. I think some people might be listening to us and they'll say to themselves, hey, this all sounds good, but if someone commits a crime, they need to face a punishment. It needs to be stiff enough that not only will they not do it again, but it'll deter other people. If that's the mindset, mm-hmm. and we aren't thinking about the evidence of what works or what doesn't work, what kinds of problems does that create?
Well, there's not a lot of evidence that people, for all types of crimes at least, are deterred and think that way about this is what the sentence is, this is what I'm facing. A lot of people have no idea what's in these criminal sentencing statutes. And maybe a white-collar offender knows something about, because they have access to lawyers and can get advice about, look, if we get prosecuted, this is what might happen. I actually think a lot of white-collar offenders aren't thinking about law either. They're thinking about making the business successful and taking risks. But regular offenders often have no idea. So here's just an example, and it may sound trivial, but there's research I'm working on with colleagues at Duke looking at this. About 1 in every 8 adult drivers in North Carolina has a suspended driver's license. And that's an enormous consequence. It means you can't get around, you can't go to the doctor, can't go to work, legally at least. What we're finding, though, is that huge numbers of people, and this is hundreds of thousands of people, have these suspended licenses because they didn't show up in court for a traffic case, a traffic ticket, or they didn't pay the traffic ticket. But we're finding that many of these people, talk about not being deterred, had no idea that their license was suspended. Later they find out because police stopped them for something else, and they say, your license is suspended. They say, what do you mean? You're saying I don't have a license? Here's my license. I have a license. But when people don't show up in court because they don't get the letter in the mail. They're poor. They live in rental housing. They change addresses. The court has the wrong address on file. They don't get the notice saying they're supposed to show up. Then there are these terrible consequences. And obviously, if people lose their jobs because they don't have a driver's license, that doesn't help us get the tickets paid. And there's a lot of thought going into, okay, do we need to be imposing these fines and fees across society, which may trap people in debt and make it harder for us to get the good things that we want out of the law?
Obviously, this is a topic that is ripe for a lot of academic research. How much has the research translated into actually getting policies changed?
So that's obviously a goal. Whenever you do research, you hope that if you come up with good solutions, that people will follow them. One area of research that I've worked on a lot is on eyewitness memory. And in North Carolina, actually, it's been many years now that good lineup practices have been in place, and which can really prevent wrongful convictions. It's been slower going in Virginia, but one thing that I did with my research team is we gave advice to the Crime Commission and helped to inform a model policy that went out to all law enforcement in Virginia to describe what steps you need to follow to show photos to an eyewitness to make sure that you're not affecting their memory, that you're testing their memory without potentially changing it. So that's one area where I feel like we had a really good impact in Virginia. On the mental health side, we did some research starting 2 years ago, trying to identify rural jurisdictions that were doing a really good job of using best practices to do early intervention. People maybe not convicted of anything, but first encounters with the police, and police have a feeling that someone might have serious mental health needs. How do they refer that person to services before things get bad? And so we provided budgets to the legislature, and the lawmakers in Virginia ended up awarding a substantial amount of money to replicate what those rural districts were doing so that other rural districts that don't have lots of psychiatric services could start to provide mental health services to avoid criminal justice problems down the road.
In the brief time that we have left, when it comes to adding evidence-based methods to criminal justice, are we kind of picking at the edges here, or is there substantial room for improvement in terms of adding evidence-based tools to what we do?
I think there is substantial room to do new work. For example, in Virginia and other districts are looking at this, we can use risk assessments to identify low-risk offenders. And so now, if all you care about is just we should impose the same punishment on everyone to deter, then you wouldn't use that approach. But what Virginia lawmakers thought in the 90s was if we know that there are people who are really low risk, who are really unlikely to do it again, yes, we will convict them, but they can serve their sentence supervised in the community at enormous cost savings and with social benefits. Now, what we found is that judges aren't using that as often as they could, and there are many thousands of people who can benefit from that. But the chances that they will do anything again are remote. And a number of prosecutors here in North Carolina are thinking about the same thing. What can we do to do diversion? If there are people who are low risk, do we need to have them in jail? Can we supervise them in the community? Can we provide better treatment than we could in a jail setting so that we can have good outcomes? But we need to evaluate this. We need to make sure that we're really identifying the right people to divert and supervise in the community. Same thing with juveniles. In some states, there's been an enormous push. Why are we putting kids in jail? Kids are much more capable of rehabilitation than grown-ups. They're not as set in their ways. They also do impulsive things, and they can commit serious crimes. Can we think about ways of doing community supervision? That's part of what the Raise the Age was all about in North Carolina. And there's plenty more that we can do to improve outcomes for kids.